Yo, I was talking to a friend of mine about the value of being single. And what I was telling her is being single is a good thing because you're learning how to be comfortable with yourself. Everybody should take time to be alone because you have to be comfortable alone and you have to be comfortable in your own skin. Like, I'm 45 now, but when I was in my early 20s, I dated dozens of women because I didn't want to go home alone. And many of the women I dated, they were feeling the same way. Because you got to remember, especially back in the late 90s, early 2000s, everybody had a car, everybody had a job, everybody had education, everybody had their own crib, and everybody had their money. But many of us just didn't want to be alone. So we were just dating who was available, not dating who we actually loved. So I dated dozens and dozens of women who just didn't want to be alone, and I didn't want to go home alone. And that led to a lot of platonic friendships, and it led to a lot of fun. It led to a lot of fighting, and it led to a lot of making up because we were available for each other, but we didn't necessarily love each other. And in our early 20s, none of us were thinking about getting married. I was just having fun, and those women were just having fun. And we dated who was available. And there was no social media, so everything was an adventure because we didn't know each other because there was no social media. We actually had to be together. Long story short, now that I'm 45, I'm comfortable being alone. Been single 2 years, and I actually love it. Because now it's just me and God, and I can actually be alone with myself. I'm actually comfortable being alone. So now I choose when I go out, and I choose who I date. That's power. But in my early 20s, that was a different person. So I didn't want to be alone because I didn't want to be alone because I wasn't comfortable being alone. That's why I was always partying. And I was making music at the time too. Long story short, many of these people, many of you crying about being toxic in toxic relationships, especially those of you in your 20s, everything is going to be toxic because you're not whole yet. You're not complete yet. You're not comfortable in your own skin yet. That's why you're dating all these people. And most of it is going to be toxic because you're not whole and happy and full and filled and all those other words yet. Get right with God. Learn to become comfortable alone. Learn to become comfortable in your own skin. Heal that abused child. Because in my early 20s, I was still walking around with that abused child inside me. That's why I wasn't comfortable being alone. Because that abused child kept coming up. So I had to drown him with the weed, drown him with the alcohol, and drown him with that loud Wu-Tang music. Which also attracted other women who had issues. Which is why those relationships, we use the word toxic now. Nothing was toxic in 98, 2000. We didn't have that word yet. It was just fun and exciting. You fight and you make up. And you love each other the next morning. And we start over. But that was just because I didn't want to be alone. And like I said before, that was the bling bling era. Everybody had money in the 90s and the early 2000s. Everybody had money. George Bush made everybody rich. But we didn't want to be alone. So every day was a celebration. Just like that Ghostface song he did. But anyway, long story long. Many of you dealing with this toxic stuff. It's because you're not comfortable being alone. Please, go get right with God. As soon as you get right with God, your perfect husband will manifest. As soon as you get right with God, you're going to meet that perfect woman because now you're whole. This is for men and for women. A lot of this toxic stuff is because you just don't want to be alone and you accept who's available and makes you feel good at that moment. But that's not your husband and that's not your wife. And as long as you're broken, you're going to keep attaching to broken people because they fit. Once you're whole, you're going to meet another whole person, and all this toxic negativity, all this red flag, green, none of that stuff is going to matter. Because you're going to be perfect, and that person's going to be perfect. But you have to be comfortable being alone, which means you got to get right with God.